So I'm going to now briefly tell you who our panelists for today's discussion. First, we have Dr. Jim Wright. He is a clinical pharmacologist, the former director of Therapeutics Initiative, and he is a professor emeritus of anesthesiology, pharmacology, and therapeutics at the University of British Columbia. We have Angela Peacock, who you will recognize as a subject of the film. She is she holds a Master of Social Work, and she is a U.S. Army veteran and mental health advocate. My name is Nicole Lamberson. I'm a physician assistant. I took psychiatric medications myself and was harmed by them, and I also work on the Medicating Normal outreach team. And last but not least, we have Lynn Cunningham, who is the co-producer, co-director of Medicating Normal, the film. So now I'm going to pass the floor to each panelist to say a little bit more about themselves, their thoughts on the film, maybe what's happened since the film has wrapped. And for the audience, we really want you guys to engage with us. So all the panelists are introducing themselves. Please go ahead and start typing any questions in the Q&A box so that once the panelists are done introducing themselves, I can start posing your questions to the panel. So I guess we can start with Dr. Wright and then Angie.
Yeah, hello. This is the second time I've seen the film. I think it's excellent, and I think it accurately reflects the suffering that a lot of people are having around the world. I see patients in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I see people who are struggling and suffering, and I am helping some of them to taper their drugs successfully. But it is an extremely difficult process.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Angie?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Angie. You saw part of my story in the film. I did graduate with my master's in social work. I'm not quite ready to practice, and I'm still healing from kind of what I've been through and the medical trauma on top of that. But I do help facilitate discussions like this. This is our 126th community screening, so we have really good discussions after the film. So I look forward to hearing from all of you.
Lynn? You're muted.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and for Dr. Wright, Nicole and Angie. You guys have been on panels before, and I just thank you to the audience too, because what we're about to do is really why we think the film is so important, because it gets people talking about these issues. There are many different perspectives that are brought up, and it's a really exciting part of it. So thank you. I might as well, because it's a question that's always asked about how the film, why the film. And it began as a personal journey, a quest to help a suffering family member, a very beloved family member in her early 20s, had been diagnosed with mental illness. She had recently graduated from a very competitive college, a scholar and athlete. And we consulted with the best psychiatrists, and she was put on medication, which really it stabilized, and it seemed to be the right thing at the time. And then fast forward 10 years later, she's taking 10 medications daily and is on disability, and very upset. I mean, not all the time upset, but I would be receiving a phone call almost every day. Lenny, is everything going to be okay? It was essentially the same question every day. And I felt at first that she might have been talking about her material well-being. But she comes from a very supportive family, and we all take care of her. And I would reassure her over and over that, you know, we were here for her, we loved her. And then I don't know how it dawned on me, but I realized that she was not talking about her material well-being, rather her potential as a human being to realize all these incredible gifts that she'd been given. She was an absolutely fantastic writer, and it just didn't look like the career was panning out that way. So, I began to feel disingenuous answering her that everything was going to be all right. And I started to think about, well, what is she taking? What are the medications actually doing? Are they actually helping? And that question led me to read a book that I think everyone, if you haven't already read it, should read, by Robert Whitaker, called An Anatomy of an Epidemic. A stunning book that goes into research, published research, unpublished research about all these issues. And that's not the only good book. There are so many good books out there that I'd never come my way because I had never been involved with these issues. But one book after another, and I joined my filmmaking partner, Wendy Ratcliffe, and together we really uncovered 5 years of intense research, talking to psychiatric patients across the country, a lot from support groups. We interviewed experts. It was a massive, intense probe into this issue. And we eventually came upon the characters that you met in our film, who we felt, their stories are not uncommon. Many, many, many people across the country had similar stories, but this group had really ability to convey and articulate, a really special group of people that we feel so honored to have portrayed their stories with. We went back maybe 2, 3, sometimes 6 times, more than, 6 times, Angie, I can't remember. But so we followed them over a 3-year period and what they were going through. And so this journey is what made the film, and these stories, and it's so important. I think listening to the stories, and that's what we were trying to weave our incredible experts. Also now, the film now becomes a discussion, and people like Dr. Wright have his own experience, and this is not not yet acknowledged, full-fledged acknowledgement in the mainstream medical community yet, but people are beginning to talk about it. And so we so look forward to your questions tonight. Please ask them and challenge us, and it will be a nice evening. Thank you.
So there's 2 questions sort of asking the same thing. The first one says, what would you suggest as an alternative to medication for coping with depression and anxiety? I've researched and experienced the benefits of meditation, but I'm curious to hear your opinions on meditation and other holistic healing methods. And then the next question, which is along the same lines, the film makes a strong case that pharma solutions are not helpful. For example, are harmful or neutral for the majority of people. Moreover, after people are able to get off the drugs, they mostly have the same problems as before. So it seems that no one should start the pharma. Then what is the solution for people with depression, anxiety, etc.? Dr. Wright, do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, there are trials comparing psychotherapy with drugs, and when you look at people at 6 months, the people receiving psychotherapy are doing better than the people on drugs. So we actually know that the drugs are not more effective than other therapies. I recommend exercise for depression. Exercise has also got as good evidence as any drugs. And so I would say any non-drug therapy that is helpful for a person is the right way to go. And it's just because the drugs are not, they're actually, the magnitude of their effect, even in the short term, is extremely small compared to placebo. And so, and in the long term, there isn't any evidence that they're effective. So really, it's just because they're not effective, and they certainly can cause harm. And you saw some of the harm that was caused in these people, and it's a lot of people are suffering a lot from long-term use of any of these drugs.
And I'll share a little bit. I think there's a lot of reasons why people experience, these so-called mental health symptoms. There's a lot of reasons people have anxiety. Like right now, the pandemic is giving everyone anxiety. The politics in the United States is giving me anxiety and depression, So there's not really a pill that's going to fix that, because it's like a contextual social, thing that's going on around us. And it's a normal reaction to that. And when we say it's normal, we don't want people to think that we're taking away that you're suffering, because the suffering is very real. There's just no easy fix for that. So what I've learned in this journey is, like, at this point, it's not a choice for me to take a medication. I can't. Like, my nervous system is so sensitized, I can't even take a Tylenol at this point. So I have to find other things. So I really think it's a personal journey. There's so many alternatives and complementary treatments. I've at different times, different things have helped me. Like I've done EMDR, EFT, which is a tapping, acupuncture. Right now I'm doing heart math and some neuro feedback at home. Yoga helps me so much. And there's a lot of research on yoga for PTSD. It really does help. I've done equine therapy. I have a service dog. That's who I keep looking at down here. There's lots of things that work. And it's just, I think sometimes we get impatient. Like, well, I tried that, it didn't work. Well, you have to try it for like 6 months before it becomes like a pattern, and let the neuroplasticity kind of like make its way to make it work for you, And there's other things, like in the film Shalimar, she needed to quit her job. She didn't need a medication to deal with her job. Me, I needed someone to say, like, Angie, what happened is really scary and it's really going to suck for a long time. And let's like talk about it and take 2 months off of work and try to decompress. Dave, he needed to take a semester off of school. So there's different things that work for different people, but I think we have to be creative and patient and try as much as we can. And maybe drugs should be the last option, not the first.
I just wanted to add too, as someone who took the medications and then was harmed by them, all of the alternatives that I didn't try or that weren't offered to me and that I didn't know about before taking the medications, I actually had to utilize them in order to survive the withdrawal syndrome from coming off of the medications. So I just would have saved myself a ton of pain and suffering if I would have tried them first, instead of, I was forced to turn to things like meditation and yoga and all of these things because the withdrawal syndrome from the medications was just so incredibly severe and much, much worse than the problem that I took it for, which was just stress at work. So the next question is something we hear a lot. So this person says, for the truly mentally ill, medications appear to be very helpful, and taking them regularly seems to work. The film does not mention this aspect of when done right, drugs can be life-giving. So it's more of a comment, but does anyone have anything?
I know other people have important things to say on this, but I wanted to say that in the showing of the film, this comes up a lot, it's true. And we totally acknowledge it. And we do not ever want to deny that fact. For some people, their experience is their experience. We just felt it was really important in this film to bring out the other side of it and the significant numbers of people who are not helped. And, even for the seriously mentally ill, of whom my family member falls into, would she be less seriously mentally ill if she hadn't been put on the 10 drugs? And she's eventually gotten down to 4, but what about the functionality? And what are the pros and cons of this? And the degree to which the medication is relied on, I think is just something that as a society we need to talk about. But we do acknowledge that drugs can and do help people. Really important.
Yeah, and in the short term, drugs are still useful, right? We don't want to get rid of all the drugs, right? So, but I would, I think that the approach should always be to treat people acutely and then try and get them off almost right away. And I would love to see a trial that did that and compared it to the current psychiatric model, which is to put people on drugs and then to add further drugs as they go along. I think that if we had a trial, it would show that short-term therapy and then trying to get off drugs and use other methods would have much better outcomes. And we really need that trial to convince the world that what we're doing is wrong right now.
And
Yeah, and I have a few things.
I was just going to say, Dr. Wright, are there some studies, I think I'm aware of reading somewhere that comparing people who are on antipsychotics long-term, they actually have worse outcomes than their counterparts who are not on antipsychotics. Is that true?
There's observational evidence of that, but not a proper randomized trial of that. But so there's evidence that in societies or in situations where drugs are being used less, that people do better with severe psychiatric illness than they do with the drugs. And the drugs all cause changes in the brain, right? And the more potent the drug and the longer you're on it, the more likely it's causing changes in the brain, and many of those changes are harmful. And we're just beginning to appreciate that. It's a fairly short history, right? As Robert Whitaker points out this is all happening since, say, 1980, right? This is a very short period of time. We really do not know that this is a good thing to be doing. And I personally believe that we will see the light, and we'll find out that this has been a really bad experiment that's occurring right now in the use of these drugs.
There's also a study. There's also a lot of studies showing that people that take antipsychotics actually their lifespan is cut 25 years. And that's because of things like the metabolic changes caused by the drugs. So it always, that comment, first of all, I was considered chronically and severe persistent mental illness. It's all over my medical record. I was in and out of the hospital a lot. I didn't leave the house for about 4 years. So I was in that category. And also that the other thing I always like to talk about is, what do we mean by they work? What does that mean to say that a drug works? Because for me, what that meant was, I might have stayed out of the hospital a little bit, but I hadn't, I was closed unto myself, no social life, no family, and maybe I behaved better for the people around me, but I was not meeting my full potential. I was not engaged in my life. Do you know what I mean? So I think we need to really critically think about that word. What do we mean when we say that drugs work for people? What does that look like? In nursing homes, antipsychotics are given to keep the elderly quiet, to not bother the nurses so much. I know that's kind of a controversial statement the way I said it, but it's kind of what's happening, So when we say that drugs work, I just urge you to think about what that means.
Yeah, and we don't have the evidence that they work long term, so it's actually an evidence-free zone.
And I'll just add to that, in some instances, for some people, not everyone, when you take medications long-term, especially certain ones like benzodiazepines, there's a phenomenon called tolerance, where the effect of the drug is it wears off, and then you can develop something called tolerance withdrawal, where you actually get withdrawal symptoms while you're still taking the medication. So in my personal situation, I just had stress at work and I was put on these drugs. And when I reached this period of tolerance on them, I actually developed symptoms of mental illness, or what would be diagnosed as mental illness, because of the medication itself that I was taking as an adverse effect. And that is how I became trapped as a psychiatric patient in the system for 5 years, because the adverse effects of the medicine I was taking were misdiagnosed as worsening so-called mental illness. And it wasn't until I was able to get myself off the medications that some of those symptoms of tolerance started to fall off. And we realized all along it was just adverse effects from the medication.
Yeah, and basically all drugs that work at the level of the brain cause tolerance in every patient. It's not just some people. They all are associated with tolerance. Yeah.
So someone asks, I don't think you mentioned Paxil in the film. Is that drug still widely prescribed, and is it more or less harmful than some of the drugs highlighted in the film?
It's still prescribed. It's paroxetine. It's an SSRI antidepressant. It has some, it's a shorter acting drug, and so it's often associated with maybe more severe withdrawal effects than some of the other antidepressants. So yes, it is a problematic drug.
Lynn, this question you could answer. What is the URL for the public viewing of Medicating Normal? And maybe you can get into some of where the film is going and that kind of thing. You're muted.
On our website, medicatingnormal.com, we have on a weekly basis, we update community screenings that we are conducting right now, just like this one. So right now, the only way the public can see the film is through these community screenings. And we absolutely urge you, if you know of a group of people or an organization who would benefit from the film, we're very interested, and we'd be very interested in contacting them. We have signed up with 2 distributors, one international who's sold it to broadcasters abroad, I think Belgium, Portugal, Hong Kong are the 3 that have just recently come our way. We have our other distributors, an educational distributor who will be reaching out to 150,000 universities and schools throughout the country. And we're very excited about this because we think if the young doctors in training and anybody in training for anything sees and talks about the film earlier rather than later, it's a good thing. And we've translated it into multiple languages, and eventually after the distributors have run their course, we are going to be hopefully positioned on a streaming platform like Netflix or something. We don't know that yet, but we will be there soon, and we'll keep everybody apprised on our website, medicatingnormal.com.
Thank you, Lynn. So this next person says, wonderful film, very much needed. I have a close friend whose husband committed suicide because of the medications he was prescribed by the military. It's always drugs rather than therapy. Maybe Dr. Wright and Angie and myself can talk a little about the suicide aspect of psychiatric medications.
Yeah, the warning that is there is because it has been shown in placebo-controlled trials to increase the risk of suicidal ideation and suicide. So it's real, right? And it's when you're treating severe depression, you would hope that you would have a therapy that would reduce the chance of suicide, right? Because that's the biggest risk in somebody who's depressed. But in reality, the drugs we have not only don't decrease the risk of suicide, they increase the risk. And so and people need to know that. I think people, when they hear that, they're often shocked to hear that information, but that's actually the truth.
Yeah, in my personal experience, and I learned later that people are at most risk when you stop, start, or change a medication. And for me, it did happen 3 times where I had severe suicidal ideation out of nowhere. The last time is what led to me coming off and being involved in this film. And what happened was, as I was tapering down under the care of a doctor, I started getting intense suicidal thoughts, and then it turned into like an urge. And it scared me because I was in college at the time. I was in a really engaging class about research methods, and I was having this great time. And I was like, I didn't really think I was going to come off all the meds. I was just taking like a harm reduction approach and slowly tapering down. And then it was to a point where I was like, something is wrong. Like something, I don't want to kill myself, but why am I having all this preoccupation? I'm thinking about it all the time. And I checked myself into the hospital and told the doctor, well, I don't understand that if I'm suicidal, why is this medicine not working? Like, it's obviously not working. So taking me off of it, it was never a thought that the drug itself could be causing it, or the way that he was tapering me too fast was causing it. So instead, as you saw in the film, what happens is these side effects, or whatever effects is what they are, drugs have effects, are they're not seen as an effect of the drug. It's seen as, well, see, that's your mental illness, and now you really need medication. So then I got another diagnosis of agitated depression, and they wanted to give me lithium, and I was like, no, I'm trying to get off of this. I don't want another drug, you know. And then I'm seen as a treatment resistant patient because I don't know what's best for me. And then you start doubting your own self, like, you know, I'm not suicidal, but they're telling me that I have some new disorder. And it just, you know, it just makes you feel like you don't know who to trust or who to listen to, and so confused, and that doesn't help, you know. So I'm so glad that I listened to my intuition, as small as it was, to like resist, like, no, I don't want to take that medication, stop, you know. But I can tell you that it has caused me great, I mean, months of time in hospitals because of suicidal side effects. But they would always say that was me, and that's kind of what I meant in the film about, they would say it was me, and it wasn't me, it was an effect of the drug, you know. So I don't know why we have that like cognitive dissonance when you read it in the pamphlet. Why don't we believe it's actually real when it happens? Or why don't they recognize that it could be a drug effect and not actually the person?
Because of the small print.
It's common, it's unfortunate but it is a common, it's that the drug, they don't want to blame the drug, I guess, because they've prescribed the drug, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and before Lynn or Nicole says anything, since the question was directly about veterans, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but veterans die at a rate of suicide of 22 veterans a day, 20 to 22, depends on who you read. And that is like well above the national average for civilians. And one of my, you know, theories that I haven't proven yet because I don't have access to this data is that veterans have a higher rate of healthcare access. Like, we can get healthcare for free. You know, we just go to the doctor, and it's kind of urged that you need to go to the VA and get help. So I've lost many friends to suicide, many. And I know for sure, veteran, that it was medication involved, but it always makes me wonder, are these medications what is leading to the veteran suicide rate? And why is that not part of the suicide prevention strategy? Because if you read any of it, nothing is included about medications.
It would be good for that to be more in the public domain to know that, right? Because that's sad.
Yeah, and Dr. Wright can tell me if I'm correct or not, but I believe like the riskiest times too for people is when they're starting a new therapy and when they are discontinuing a new therapy. So if you have family members that are starting new medications, or you yourself, or coming off of them, those are particularly risky times. And in my own experience, I became extremely suicidal on the medications that I was prescribed. It may be because I was a polypharmacy patient, meaning I had 6 drugs at the same time. And so the more drugs you pile on, the greater risk of side effects and adverse interactions and everything that can happen. And then the most suicidal I ever was upon discontinuation of the psychiatric medication, because I was unaware that they had to be tapered incredibly slowly. My doctors were unaware that they had to be tapered incredibly slowly, and I abruptly discontinued the medicine and was severely suicidal. Both as a function of the withdrawal syndrome, and also because I was suffering so horribly that what was happening in my body was so inhumane that suicide was a viable option to make that stop.
Yeah, you're quite right. So any change in dose, either up or down, or starting the medication or a new medication, is always the highest risk time. Yeah.
So this person says, I was thankful to hear in the film about the online support groups. I've been taking Klonopin since my husband died for insomnia 9 years ago, and I think I will check out such a group. Angie,
Yeah, let me talk about the groups. To be a trained therapist and to find out that, oh my God, there is large support groups online of people that are tapering medication without the help of doctors was absolutely shocking to me. At the same time, it probably saved my life because I did not know what was happening to me. All I knew that I had come off the medication and I felt like a bomb went off in my body. And I kept asking the doctor, something is wrong with me, something, like I was hysterical. I would tell him, I'm going to list you all my symptoms. What is wrong with me? And he said I had MS. And then it was, oh, you have a brain injury. And then I'm like, no, I stopped the drug and now I'm affected a week later. Like something is happening, And all I did was Google benzodiazepine withdrawal and everything was there. And I could not believe, like, I had never heard of such a thing, of taking a prescribed drug. Like, I wasn't addicted to it. I didn't take more than I was supposed to. I wasn't misusing it. I was taking extremely low dose. I was tapering under the care of a doctor. I did everything right. And then I found these support groups where people were explaining exactly the same thing. And I'm like, okay, well, if there's 40,000 people in this group, I don't think 40,000 people are in a collective delusion. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then I found like multiple groups. And so it is shocking. And it's almost turning this, like, we have this preconceived notion that, there's a medical authority, that doctors tell us they are the experts. There's this scientific evidence literature that we look to. In this case, there's like wisdom in these support groups of people helping each other in a peer way over the course of years. A lot of people, taper very slowly, and then they have to heal from the drugs, and then they have to reevaluate their life. What does mental illness mean to me? What do my symptoms mean? How do I take care of them now after I have left the mental health realm? So it's kind of revolutionary in a way. It's like this underground of people, but it's shocking to think that the patients have more wisdom, more collective wisdom about how to do this in absence of medical help.
Yeah. Is there any central area, any central source where people can go to find out if there's a doctor in their area?
We have a little bit, like Benzodiazepine Information Coalition has a doctor list, but it's kind of like, we're not vouching for these doctors, but here's some doctors that have been used that seemed open-minded and were open to a patient-centered, symptom-based slow taper at whatever. Let the patient keep their autonomy a little bit. There's little lists here and there, but they're very few. I mean, we get emails all the time. Like, do you know a doctor in Orlando, Florida? Do you know somebody in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? Do you know someone in British Columbia? I mean, weekly we get emails like that. It's hard to find it out.
I get emails like that, and because I can't really be working with people outside of my local area. So yeah.
I just wanted to say that one of the wonderful things about the film is that every time we have a screening, we often meet new doctors and people come on board, and it's almost like there are great doctors out there who are aware of this. It's just that they're not on these massive support groups, but we keep encouraging them. Start your support group. Start if you're a resident and you're questioning what you're learning in med school, start a group. And there are people who are doing that, but it's just such a vast world that to connect everyone is hard. But I don't think our film would exist without the internet. I mean, I'm thinking about what Angie was saying, and about the old way of engaging with psychiatry would be that you would go in and have this sort of very lonely one-on-one experience, not lonely, but very much of a one-on-one, stigmatized often relationship with one person. And you didn't share necessarily what you were going through with your peers. And now that the internet has provided these spaces, and I know they're looked upon, they're distrusted by many doctors, but there are now these spaces where people can compare their experiences in the one-on-one doctor-patient relationship. And I think it's only going to make it better. I mean, I think it's why we were able to find Angie. I don't think we found you in a support group, Angie, but someone that we knew you.
Yeah,
anyway.
from a support group. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think support groups are very valuable. Yeah, so people, mostly you're going to get pretty good information from people who've gone through this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just add too that there are medical professionals in the support group. I'm a PA. I trained medically, and I use the support groups all the time. I did to survive psychiatric drug withdrawal, and I met countless other medical professionals in the support groups, because the whole reason this is a problem is because it's not being taught in medical schools. And so some of us who went to medical school are actually falling victim to it as well. And then we have to turn to the internet to figure out what happened to us and how to effectively get off the medications as well. I've thought so many times, like, I am a physician assistant and I know people in the support communities who are cardiologists and other physicians. And we went to doctors complaining of these problems with the medication and withdrawal symptoms, and we were disbelieved. So with all of our privilege as being medical professionals, we were disbelieved. I can only imagine what it's like to just be a layperson patient and how hard it is, to find help.
Yeah. And there's new drugs coming on the market all the time. And so it's, we don't, so every new drug, we don't have much experience, right? And so it's not, there's no magic way of dealing with this. And the new drugs, nobody will have any experience in trying to taper off them, but it is going to be a problem going forward as well.
Yeah, and just for anybody in the audience that's curious, if you go on Facebook and you just type in like Effexor or Paxil or Prozac or Cymbalta, every group will pop up. I know the Cymbalta Hurts Worse group has like 40,000 members. Effexor will have 5,000. One for benzodiazepines would have 10,000, and then there's like 8 groups for benzos. And then there's some groups that are off Facebook. One is called survivingantidepressants.org. Another one is called Benzo Buddies Forum. It's anonymous, so people don't have their real names. But what it does is it does hold like case studies of people that have come off and tapered, and there's some research coming out of that there's certain people that kept a journal, a 4-year journal of how they tapered off meds and how they coped with that and how they feel now. So there was some research just released by the founder of Surviving Antidepressants, and one of our panelists, sometimes his name is Mark Horowitz, is kind of like a case study of people that tapered off of antidepressants and what happened. So it's pretty fascinating to see.
If anybody who hasn't read Anatomy of an Epidemic, they should read it, because it's really an excellent book.
So this next person says, I've been prescribed Cymbalta for several years now, and the psychiatrist says it has no long-term negative effects. Is this true, or is it that no long-term studies exist? How do we discover the truth behind the reports and the research? For example, in the film, it noted that the pharma company just omitted the long-term harm of its drug versus the placebo.
Yeah, there are no long-term placebo-controlled trials, but if you just read the product monograph, you know that there are a lot of harms, right? They're all listed there. So the idea that the drug is safe is just not true, right? There are adverse effects, and long-term we know less and less because there's not that many people who've been taking it long-term as well. So we really don't have a lot of information for in that sense. So yeah, and the idea that drugs wouldn't cause harm and wouldn't have an accumulating harm over time is naive, really. Of course they could, and of course they probably almost certainly will. So yeah, it's just the wrong idea that they're safe in the long term. Yeah.
I think it brings up a really good question that sometimes comes up, and it's, how to find a good doctor. Like the exit plan we've talked about a lot is, when you're interviewing doctors, and Dr. Wright, I know you're a good doctor, but when you're talking about a medication, there is nothing wrong with asking, okay, well, maybe I will go on Cymbalta, but what's the exit plan? When do I come off of it? Do you plan on having me on it for life? If I do come off of it, do you know how to get me off of it? All these, we're working on an educational manual to go with the film when it goes into schools, and I forget what category that's going to be under, but I just think there's some very basic good questions that one needs to ask a doctor before you start a drug.
Yeah.
And if the doctor doesn't know, that's a red flag, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah. But when you're depressed, you're not going to be thinking about all those questions, which is, so you're very vulnerable in that setting, unfortunately.
True. Yeah, you're kind of talking about basic health literacy. What do we know about medications when we go into the doctor's office? You know, how do we know what questions to ask? And it's just so important. It's the lesson that was the hardest to learn in this, you know, that you can't just blindly hand over your body and say, fix me, and not expect something to happen, you know, there to be an effect from that.
Well, and some people feel ill-equipped to read research studies and that kind of thing. You know, it's not easy to read and interpret them, especially if you don't have training, but there are organizations like Dr. Wright, you were part of the Therapeutics initiative, and you guys do, you know, extensive literature review to put information out to the public to say, you know, this therapy is probably a decently effective one. This therapy is probably not so effective. And so people could look at resources like that if they're just a lay person to make decisions.
Yeah, so the website is open to everybody. It's www.ti.ubc.ca. And it is everything that's on there is being done by independent researchers who don't have any bias other than to try and find out what the truth is. So it's one of a few completely independent sources of drug information. It's not going to have everything that you want, but at least there's information about quite a large number of drugs there. Yeah.
So we can take just a couple more questions that are here, and then we can close for the evening. Is there any evidence that brain changes from long-term use of antipsychotics are irreversible even after discontinuation?
The answer is unfortunately yes. We know, and we've known this for quite a long time, tardive dyskinesia occurs in a fairly large proportion of people taking antipsychotics long-term. And in many of those patients, the condition continues after the drug is stopped. So it's a permanent, irreversible damage to the brain. And I think it's just a canary in the coal mine in terms of other permanent damages that can occur with these drugs.
Can you define tardive dyskinesia? Because I don't think many people know what that actually is.
Okay, yeah, so those are involuntary movements, often of the tongue and mouth, but and can be of the arms and legs. And they're uncontrollable and quite disturbing.
And last question, as an adult, you can decide to step out of medications. I think they mean like, you know, remove yourself from psychiatry, wean off. But my question is, how can we be more aware about the side effects in minors?
I always tell people, I meet a lot of parents when we do film screenings, especially when we were in person. And step one for any parent, you must take the time to read the entire pamphlet before giving the first pill. Because if you read it closely, I mean, I read things that were shocking that I would never. My sister had a stint with Adderall, and her doctor told her to stop it cold turkey. And when she did that, all hell broke loose. It was not a pretty sight. So I went through and read just the Adderall generic pamphlet, and it literally says, at any time, a person taking a therapeutic dose can experience psychosis, hallucinations at any time, like taking the normal dose. They also have a black box warning on that drug. So anyway, my point is that you should take the time. And the easiest way to do that is you look up FDA insert and then put the drug name on Google, and it will pop right up, and it's a PDF file. It might be 30 pages. You don't have to read the pharmacokinetics and all the pharmacy language, but read like contraindications, warnings, black box warnings. It'll say something about withdrawal. That is, you have to do that. Like, it is your due diligence to do that, to know what to look for. Another thing that Lynn mentioned sometimes is from the pharmacist in the movie. He says to keep a journal. So when your child starts a drug, or an adult, it's for both, start, before, my mood is, on a scale of 1 to 5, I feel like a 3. I don't know, urinary frequency, headaches, you keep track of all these things. And it's easier because I can tell you from experiencing this, from the time I went onto the drug to the time I came off, that was 13 years. Okay. And slowly, it happened so slowly, it was almost imperceptible that I got, farther and farther away from who I was before I took the drug. And I was just completely convinced I'm completely mentally ill. I'm going to be on disability forever. I'm going to have to live a poverty life. Like, this is just my world revolves around psychiatry appointments and therapy appointments and groups, support groups. That's what my life had become. But if I had kept a journal, I could have seen those changes and more objectively than me living that. Do you know what I'm saying? So, basic health literacy, we're right back to that. Talk to the pharmacist. Like Rebecca's family in the movie said, we noticed these changes in our daughter. We told the doctor didn't really buy it. We listened to our intuition. There's always, everyone I meet, there's always a voice in there that says like, something's not right. I don't feel okay, and we're taught to like, not listen to that. I had it for years and I was like, no, my doctor says like, I have to take this, So anyway, those are just some of the tips, but I feel really strongly about that you have to read that pamphlet and you have to believe what it says. I mean, that is what the science is based on. That is what FDA approval goes through. And that's the information you need to know.
Yeah, and you'll almost always find out that the drugs have never been tested in children and adolescents. So you're then taking a drug that has never been part of a trial to even know whether it's effective in that population. So
I just want one of our most impactful screenings recently was with a very large foster care organization in New York State, and all the caseworkers showed up. That we had a lunch and learn screening of the film, and every single person, these were not the children watching the film, these were the people who were interfacing between the kids and the foster care families. And this group is very vulnerable. They are mostly on cocktails, so they're not just on one, they're on 2, 3, 4. All the caseworkers were horrified. It is a huge, it should be our next film. It's a huge issue, and thank you for asking the question. Kids do not have informed consent. They're not even old enough to have it. And it's a huge, huge problem. And everything, so we want to get the film out to the community. Parents are great audiences. So again, if you guys know parents or PTA groups, or we believe that talking about the film, about these issues, will maybe help reach this group. Other vulnerable groups are the elderly. I mean, it goes on and on, but foster care and kids are, they're being over medicated.
Yeah, I'd recommend you do that film. Yeah. Sounds like a very important one. Yeah.
I'll just add too, from my perspective, I wasn't a child when I was put on the medications, but I did have a father who tipped me off to that. My behavior and everything had changed on the medication. So parents can play a really big role in noticing who your children are and who they become when they're medicated, and picking up on these changes that, like Angie said, sometimes they can be so insidious in the person experiencing them. And I always say, it affects your brain, and your brain is the thing that you use to like know who you are and be in touch with reality and all of that. So when that's altered, you aren't your own best like judge of anything. So sometimes outsiders, parents, can have a lot more insight to offer. And just interacting with people in the withdrawal support community who were medicated as children. A lot of them, report really resenting that happened to them. And they say, it altered the course of their entire lives or moving into their adult lives. And a lot of them feel like they didn't develop emotionally, and like they were just sort of stuck as being children where they started, because they didn't experience emotions and life in the same way that they would have were they not medicated. So I think we will close here. Everyone, if anyone has any closing thoughts, we can just go around. And I think Lynn and Angie have some things to add at the end, just about where to find us and if you have questions and that kind of thing.
Well, I just want to thank you all for showing up, and it's an honor. This group is always, it's an admirable group who curious, and you guys think about new things, and thank you so much for addressing this issue. And please keep in contact with us. We really are looking for people interested in learning more and in really creating a society-wide conversation about this, what's been a very taboo topic. So our outreach team is incredible. We are actively fundraising for our outreach. We have many languages to translate. We have many different communities to go into. So thank you. If you have any ideas on that, let us know. And let's see, I like to say with our educational distribution and our community screenings, we have a military term that Angie might be able to pick up on called, this screening is a force multiplier. Every single one of you who watched tonight, who have thought about these issues, will then go and talk to other people. So thank you, and keep in touch with us. Medicatingnormal@gmail.com.
Can I just thank you for inviting me? And I'm a great fan of the movie, and I'd be more than happy to help in any way I can going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Wright.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Dr. Wright, before you go, there's something you said at one point, I think it was you, that like, if people and physicians, as a clinical pharmacologist yourself, if they actually studied the drugs to the extent that you do as a clinical pharmacologist, not just psychiatric medication, but all medication, you said something to the effect of, what?
Well, the more you know about these drugs, and most people don't know very much about the drugs, the less likely you're going to take them. And basically, and for sure, the less likely you're going to take them on a long-term basis, really. So many drugs are effective short-term, and thank goodness we have some of those, but long-term drugs, you want to really be careful about in terms of knowing whether there really is good evidence for continuing to take them. And as a pharmacologist, I don't take any drugs.
Good to know.
That's just
relate.
one of my favorite things that you've ever said. So I thought it was important to get you to say it again.
And I'll just say a couple of quick outreach notes. We have a YouTube channel with over 150 videos right now. We have 1 million viewing minutes. So it's become a very successful channel, and this recording will be up there. Maybe give me about 2 weeks to edit it. We also have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where I post articles about these issues that are just thought-provoking articles. I spend a lot of time selecting really intriguing topics. So if you want to continue learning about these topics, we always like to say, don't believe anything we said. Just let this begin your own journey toward what it means to have symptoms or what to do about that. Again, if you'd like to donate, we have a donate page on our medicatingnormal.com website, or you can donate through PayPal at medicatingnormal@gmail.com. And we have lots more screenings coming up, or if you know anyone that would like to do a screening, just email us at medicatingnormal@gmail.com. And thank you so much.
So thank you to everybody on the panel and everyone in the audience, and special thanks to the Foreign Policy Association for hosting us tonight. And I think we will go ahead and close. So everybody stay healthy and take good care. Thanks, guys. Bye.